Chapter 17. At Imeguin. As if a thief should steal a tainted vest, some dead man spoil, and sicken of his pest. Hood. 'Tis bitterer to me than wormwood the memory of what followed, and I shall tell the story in the fewest words I may. We were cast into prison, and lay there for months in a stone cell with little light, and only foul straw to lie on. At first we were cut and bruised from that tussle and cudgelling in Alderbrand's house, and it was long before we were recovered of our wounds, for we had nothing but bread and water to live on, and that so bad as barely to hold body and soul together. Afterwards, the heavy fetters that were put about our ankles set up sores, and galled us so that we scarce could move for pain. And if the iron galled my flesh, my spirit chafed 10 times more within those damp and dismal walls. Yet all that time Elzevir never breathed a word of reproach, though it was my wilfulness had led us into so terrible a strait. At last came our gaoler one morning and said that we must be brought up that day before the Gerecht, which is their court of assize, to be tried for our crime. So we were marched off to the courthouse, in spite of sores and heavy irons, and were glad enough to see the daylight once more, and drink the open air, even though it should be to our death that we were walking, for the gaoler said they were like to hang us for what we had done. In the courthouse our business was soon over, because there were many to speak against us, but none to plead our cause, and all being done in the Dutch language, I understood nothing of it, except what Elzevir told me afterwards. There was Mr. Alderbrand, in his black gown and buckled shoes, with tip-tilted heels, standing at a table and giving evidence, how that one afternoon in August came 2 evil-looking English sailors to his house under pretence of selling a diamond, which turned out to be but a lump of glass, and that having taken observation of all his dwelling, and more particularly the approaches to his business room, they went their ways. But later in the same day, or rather night, as he sat matching together certain diamonds for a coronet ordered by the most illustrious Holy Roman Emperor, these same ill-favoured English sailors burst suddenly through shutters and window, and made forcible entry into his business room. There they furiously attacked him, wrenched the diamond from his hand, and beat him within an ace of his life. But, by the good providence of God, and his own foresight, the window was fitted with a certain alarm, which rang bells in other parts of the house. Thus his trusty servants were summoned, and, after being themselves attacked and nearly overborne, succeeded at last in mastering these scurvy ruffians, and handing them over to the law, from which Mr. Alderbrand claimed sovereign justice. Thus much Elzevir explained to me afterwards. But at the time when that pretender spoke of the diamond as being his own, Elzevir cut in, and said in open court that 'twas a lie, and that this precious stone was none other than the one that we had offered in the afternoon, when Alderbrand had said 'twas glass. Then the diamond merchant laughed, and took from his purse our great diamond, which seemed to fill the place with light, and dazzled half the court. He turned it over in his hand, poising it in his palm like a great flourishing lamp of light, and asked if 'twas likely that no common sailormen should hawk a stone like that. Nay, more, that the court might know what daring rogues they had to deal with, he pulled out from his pocket the quittance given him by Shalamoff of Petersburg for this same jewel, and showed it to the judge. Whether 'twas a forged quittance, or one for some other stone, we know not, but Elzevir spoke again, saying that the stone was ours, and we had found it in England. Then Mr. Alderbrand laughed again, and held the jewel up once more. Were such pebbles, he asked, found on the shore by every squalid fisherman? And the great diamond flashed as he put it back into his purse, and cried to me, Am I not the queen of all the diamonds of the world? Must I house with this base rascal? But I was powerless now to help. After Alderbrand, the serving men gave witness, telling how they had trapped us in the act, red-handed, and as for the jewel, they had seen their master handle it any time in these past 6 months. But Elzevir was galled to the quick with all their falsehoods, and burst out again that they were liars and the jewel ours, till a gaoler who stood by struck him on the mouth and cut his lip to silence him. The process was soon finished, and the judge, in his red robes, stood up and sentenced us to the galleys for life, bidding us admire the mercy of the law to outlanders, for had we been Dutchmen, we would sure have hanged. Then they took and marched us out of court, as well as we could walk for fetters, and Elzevir with a bleeding mouth. But as we passed the place where Alderbrand sat, he bows to me and says in English, "Your servant, Mr. Trenchard. I wish you a good day, Sir John Trenchard, of Moonfleet, in Dorset." The gaoler paused a moment, hearing Alderbrand speak to us, though not understanding what he said, so I had time to answer him. "Good day, Sir Alderbrand, liar and thief, and may the diamond bring you evil in this present life, and damnation in that which is to come." So we parted from him, and at the same time parted from our liberty and from all joys of life. We were fettered together with other prisoners in droves of 6, our wrists manacled to a long bar, but I was put into a different gang from Elzevir. Thus we marched a 10 days' journey into the country to a place called Imeguin, where a royal fortress was building. That was a weary march for me, for 'twas January, with wet and miry roads, and I had little enough clothes upon my back to keep off rain and cold. On either side rode guards on horseback, with loaded flintlocks across the saddle-bow, and long whips in their hands with which they let fly at any laggard, though 'twas hard enough for men to walk where the mud was over the horses' fetlocks. I had no chance to speak to Elzevir all the journey, and indeed spoke nothing at all, for those to whom I was chained were brute beasts rather than men, and spoke only in Dutch to boot. There was but little of the building of the fortress begun when we reached Imeguin, and the task that we were set to was the digging of the trenches and other earthworks. I believe that there were 500 men employed in this way, and all of them condemned like us to galley work for life. We were divided into squads of 25, but Elzevir was drafted to another squad and a different part of the workings, so I saw him no more except at odd times, now and again, when our gangs met, and we could exchange a word or two in passing. Thus I had no solace of any company but my own, and was driven to thinking, and to occupy my mind with the recollection of the past. And at first the life of my boyhood, now lost forever, was constantly present even in my dreams, and I would wake up thinking that I was at school again under Mr. Glennie, or talking in the summer-house with Grace, or climbing Weatherbeach Hill, with the salt channel breeze singing through the trees. But alas, these things faded when I opened my eyes, and knew the foul-smelling wood hut and floor of fetid straw where 50 of us lay in fetters every night. I say I dreamt these things at first, but by degrees remembrance grew blunted and the images less clear, and even these sweet, sad visions of the night came to me less often. Thus life became a weary round, in which month followed month, season followed season, year followed year, and brought always the same eternal, profitless work. And yet the work was merciful, for it dulled the biting edge of thought, and the unchanging evenness of life gave wings to time. In all the years the locusts ate for me at Imeguin, there is but one thing I need to speak of here. I had been there a week when I was loosed one morning from my irons and taken from work into a little hut apart, where there stood a half-dozen of the guard, and in the midst a stout wooden chair with clamps and bands. A fire burned on the floor, and there was a fume and smoke that filled the air with a smell of burned meat. My heart misgave me when I saw that chair and fire and smelt that sickly smell, for I guessed this was a torture room, and these the torturers waiting. They forced me into the chair, and bound me there with lashings and a cramp about the head, and then one took a red iron from the fire upon the floor, and tried it a little away from his hand to prove the heat. I had screwed up my heart to bear the pain as best I might, but when I saw that iron sighed for sheer relief, because I knew it for only a branding tool, and not the torture. And so they branded me on the left cheek, setting the iron between the nose and cheekbone where it was plainest to be seen. I took the pain and scorching light enough, seeing that I had looked for much worse, and should not have made mention of the thing here at all, were it not for the branding mark they used. Now this mark was a Y, being the first letter of Imeguin, and set on all prisoners that worked there, as I found afterwards. But to me, 'twas much more than a mere letter, and nothing less than the black Y itself, or cross-pawl of the Mohunes. Thus, as a sheep is marked with his owner's keel, and can be claimed wherever he may be, so here I was branded with the keel of the Mohunes, and marked for theirs in life or death, whithersoever I should wander. 'Twas 3 months after that, and the mark healed and well set, that I saw Elzevir again. And as we passed each other in the trench and called a greeting, I saw that he, too, bore the cross-pawl full on his left cheek. Thus years went on, and I was grown from boy to man, and that no weak one either. For though they gave us but scant food and bad, the air was fresh and strong. 1 second, Joey, okay, he's not. He was about to walk on my shortcuts. The air was fresh and strong, because Imeguin was meant for palace as well as fortress, and they chose a healthful site. And by degrees the moats were dug, and ramparts built, and stone by stone the castle rose till 'twas near the finish, and so our labour was not wanted. Every day squads of our fellow prisoners marched away, and my gang was left till nearly last, being engaged in making good a culvert that the heavy rains had broken down. It was in the 10th year of our captivity, and in the 26th of my age, that one morning, instead of the guard marching us to work, they handed us over to a party of mounted soldiers, from whose matchlocks and long whips I knew that we were going to leave Imeguin. Before we left, another gang joined us, and how my heart went out when I saw Elzevir among them. It was 2 years or more since we had met even to pass a greeting, for I worked outside the fortress, and he on the great tower inside, and I took note his hair was whiter and a sadder look upon his face. And as for the cross-pawl on his cheek, I never thought of it at all, for we were all so well used to the mark, that if one bore it not stamped upon his face, we should have stared at him as on a man born with but one eye. But though his look was sad, yet Elzevir had a kind smile and hearty greeting for me as he passed, and on the march, when they served out our food, we got a chance to speak a word or two together. Yet how could we find room for much gladness? For even the pleasure of meeting was marred, because we were forced thus to take note, as it were, of each other's misery, and to know that the one had nothing for his old age but to break in prison, and the other nothing but the prison to eat away the strength of his prime. Before long, all knew whither we were bound, for it leaked out that we were to march to The Hague, and thence Scheveningen, to take ship to the settlements of Java, where they used transported felons on the sugar farms. Was this the end of young hopes and lofty aims, to live and die a slave in the Dutch plantations? Hopes of grace, hopes of seeing Moonfleet again, were dead long, long ago. And now was there to be no hope of liberty, or even a wholesome air, this side the grave, but only burning sun and steaming swamps and the crack of the slave-driver's whip till the end came? Could it be so? Could it be so? And yet what help was there, or what release? Had I not watched 10 years for any gleam of loophole of relief, and never found it? If we were shut in cells or dungeons in the deepest rock, we might have schemed escape, but here in the open, fettered up in droves, what could we do? They were bitter thoughts enough that filled my heart as I trudged along the rough roads, fettered by my wrist to the long bar, and seeing Elzevir's white hair and bowed shoulders trudging in front of me, remembering when that head had scarce a grizzle on it, and the back was straight as the massive stubborn pillars in old Moonfleet church. What was it had brought us to this pitch? And then I called to mind a July evening, years ago, the twilight summer-house, and a sweet, grave voice that said, "Have a care how you touch the treasure. It was evilly come by, and will bring a curse with it." Aye, 'Twas the diamond had done it all, and brought a blight upon my life since that first night I spent in Moonfleet vault, and I cursed the stone, and Blackbeard, and his lost Mohunes, and trudged on bearing their cognizance branded on my face. We marched back to the Hague, and through that very street where Aldebrand dwelt, only the house was shut, and the board that bore his name taken away, so it seemed that he had left the place, or else was dead. Thus we reached the quays at last, and though I knew that I was leaving Europe and leaving all hope behind, yet 'twas a delight to smell the sea again and fill my nostrils with the keen salt air. Chapter 18. In the Bay. Let broad leagues dissever him from yonder foam. O God, to think man ever comes too near his home. Hood. The ship that was to carry us swung at the buoy a quarter of a mile offshore, and there were rowboats waiting to take us to her. She was a brig of some 120 tons burthen, and as we came under the stern I saw her name was the Aurangzeba. 'Twas with regret unspeakable I took my last look at Europe, and casting my eyes round saw the smoke of the town dark against the darkening sky, yet knew that neither smoke nor sky was half as black as was the prospect of my life. You coming back down, Joey? Okay. They sent us down to the orlop deck, or lowest deck, a foul place where was no air nor light, and shut the hatches down on top of us. There were 30 of us, all told, hustled and driven like pigs into this deck, which was to be our pigsty for 6 months or more. Here was just light enough, when they had the hatches off, to show us what sort of place it was, namely as foul as it smelt, with never table, seat, nor anything but roughest planks and balks. And there they changed our bonds, taking away the bar and putting a tight bracelet round one wrist, with a padlock's chain running through a loop on it. Thus we were still ironed, 6 together, but had a greater freedom and more scope to move. And more than this, the man who shifted the chains, whether through caprice or perhaps because he really wished to show us what pity he might, padlocked me onto the same chain with Elzevir, saying we were English swine and might sink or swim together. Then the hatches were put on, and there they left us in the dark to think or sleep or curse the time away. The weariness of Imeguin was bad indeed, and yet it was a heaven to this night of hell, where all we had to look for was twice a day the moving of the hatches and half an hour's glimmer of a ship's lantern, while they served us out the broken victuals that the Dutch crew would not eat. I shall say nothing of the foulness of this place, because 'twas too foul to be written on paper, and if 'twas foul at starting, 'twas 10 times worse when we reached the open sea, for of all the prisoners, only Elzevir and I were sailors, and the rest took the motion unkindly. 1 second, Joey wishes to leave. He has finished his inspections of the window. All is well. From the first, we made bad weather of it, for though we were below we could see nothing, yet 'twas easy enough to tell there was a heavy head sea running, almost as soon as we were well out of harbour. Although Elzevir and I had not had any chance of talking freely for so long, and were now able to speak as we liked, being linked so close together, we said but little. And this, not because we did not value very greatly one another's company, but because we had nothing to talk of except memories of the past, and those were too bitter, and came too readily to our minds to need any to summon them. There was, too, the banishment from Europe, from all and everything we loved, and the awful certainty of slavery that lay continuously on us like a weight of lead. Thus we said little. We had been out a week, I think, for time is difficult enough to measure, where there is neither clock nor sun nor stars, when the weather, which had moderated a little, began to grow much worse. The ship plunged and laboured heavily, and this added much to our discomfort, because there was nothing to hold on by, and unless we lay flat on the filthy deck, we ran a risk of being flung to the side, whenever there came a more violent lurch or roll. Though we were so deep down, yet the roaring of wind and wave was loud enough to reach us, and there was such a noise when the ship went about, such grinding of ropes with creaking and groaning of timbers, as would make a landsman fear the brig was going to pieces. And this some of our fellow prisoners feared indeed, and fell to crying or kneeling chained together as they were upon the sloping deck, while they tried to remember long-forgotten prayers. For my own part, I wondered why these poor wretches should pray to be delivered from the sea, when all that was before them was lifelong slavery. But I was perhaps able to look more calmly on the matter myself, as having been at sea, and not thinking that the vessel was going to founder because of the noise. Yet the storm rose till 'twas very plain that we were in a raging sea, and the streams which began to trickle through the joinings of the hatch showed that water had got below. "I have known better ships go under for less than this," Elzevir said to me, "and if our skipper hath not a tight craft and stout hands to work her, there will soon be 2 slaves the less to cut the canes in Java. I cannot guess where we are now. May be off Ushant, may not be so far, for this sea is too short for the bay. But the saints send us sea room, for we have been wearing these 3 hours." 'Twas true enough that we had gone to wearing, as one might tell from the heavier roll or wallowing when we went round, instead of the plunging of attack. But there was no chance of guessing at our whereabouts. The only thing we had to reckon time withal was the taking off of the hatch twice a day for food, and even this poor clock kept not the hour too well, for often there were such gaps and intervals as made our bellies pine, and at this present we had waited so long that I craved even that filthy broken meat they fed us with. So we were glad enough to hear a noise at the hatch, just as Elzevir had done speaking, and the cover was flung off, letting in a splash of salt water and a little dim and dusky light. But instead of the guard with their muskets and lanterns and the tubs of broken victuals, there was only one man, and that the jailer who had padlocked us into gangs at the beginning of the voyage. He bent down for a moment over the hatch, holding on to the coaming to steady himself in the sea way, and flung a key on a chain down into the orlop right among us. "Take it," he shouted in Dutch, "and make the most of it. God helps the brave, and the devil takes the hindmost." That said, he stayed not one moment, but turned around quick and was gone. I just found a cat hair in my mouth. Don't kiss your cats, folks. For an instant, none knew what this play portended, and there was the key lying on the deck, and the hatch left open. Then Elzevir saw what it all meant, and seized the key. "John," he cries, speaking to me in English, "the ship is foundering, and they are giving us a chance to save our lives and not drown like rats in a trap." With that he tried the key on the padlock which held our chain, and it fitted so well that in a trice our gang was free. Off fell the chains clanking on the floor, and nothing left of our bonds but an iron bracelet clamped round the left wrist. You may be sure the others were quick enough to make use of the key when they knew what 'twas, but we waited not to see more, but made for the ladder. Now, Elzevir and I, being used to the sea, were first through the hatchway above, and oh, the strength and sweet coolness of the sea air, instead of the warm, fetid reek of the orlop below. There was a good deal of water sousing about on the main deck, but nothing to show the ship was sinking, yet none of the crew was to be seen. We stayed there not a second, but moved to the companion as fast as we could for the heavy pitching of the ship, and so came on deck. The dusk of a winter's evening was setting in, yet with ample light to see near at hand, and the first thing I perceived was that the deck was empty. There was not a living soul but us upon it. The brig was broached to, with her bows against the heaviest sea I ever saw, and the waves swept her fore and aft, so we made for the tail of the deck-house, and there took stock. But before we got there I knew why 'twas the crew were gone, and why they let us loose, for Elzevir pointed to something whither we were drifting, and shouted in my ear so that I heard it above all the raging of the tempest. "We are on a lee shore!" We were lying head to sea, and never a bit of canvas left except one storm staysail. There were tattered ribbons fluttering on the yards to show where the sails had been blown away, and every now and then the staysail would flap like a gun going off to show it wanted to follow them. But for all we lay head to sea, we were moving backwards, and each great wave as it passed carried us on stern first with a leap and swirling lift. 'Twas over the stern that Elzevir pointed, in the course that we were going, and there was such a mist, what with the wind and rain and spindrift, that one could see but a little way. And yet I saw too far, for in the mist to which we were making a sternboard, I saw a white line like a fringe or valance to the sea, and then I looked to starboard, and there was the same white fringe, and then to larboard, and the white fringe was there too. Only those who know the sea know how terrible were Elzevir's words uttered in such a place. A moment before I was exalted with the keen salt wind, and with the hope and freedom that had been strangers for long, but now 'twas all dashed, and death, that is so far off to the young, had moved nearer by 50 years, was moving a year nearer every minute. "We are on a lee shore!" Elzevir shouted, and I looked and knew what the white fringe was, and that we should be in the breakers in half an hour. What a whirl of wind and wave and sea, what a whirl of thought and wild conjecture! What was that land to which we were drifting? Was it cliff with deep water and iron face, where a good ship is shattered at a blow and death comes like a thunderclap? Or was it shelving sand, where there is stranding and the pound, pound, pound of the waves for hours before she goes to pieces and all is over? We were in a bay, for there was the long white crescent of surf reaching far away on either side, till it was lost in the dusk, and the brig helpless in the midst of it. Elzevir had hold of my arm and gripped it hard as he looked to larboard. I followed his eyes, and where one horn of the white crescent faded into the mist, caught a dark shadow in the air, and knew it was high land looming behind. And then the murk and driving rain lifted ever so little, and as it were only for that purpose, and we saw a misty bluff slope down into the sea like the long head of a basking alligator poised upon the water, and stared into each other's eyes and cried together, "The snout!" It had vanished almost before it was seen, and yet we knew there was no mistake. It was the snout that was there looming behind the moving wrack, and we were in Moonfleet Bay. Oh, what a rush of thought then came, dazing me with its sweet bitterness, to think that after all these weary years of prison and exile we had come back to Moonfleet. We were so near, so all we loved, so near, only a mile of broken water, and yet so far, for death lay between, and we had come back to Moonfleet to die. There was a change came over Elzevir's features when he saw the snout. His face had lost its sadness and wore a look of sober happiness. He put his mouth close to my ear and said, "There is some strange leading hand has brought us home at last, and I had rather drown on Moonfleet Beach than live in prison any more. And drown we must within an hour. Yet we will play the man, and make a fight for life." And then, as if gathering together all his force, "We have weathered bad times together, and who knows, but we shall weather this." The other prisoners were on deck now, and had found their way aft. They were wild with fear, being landsmen and never having seen an angry sea, and indeed that sea might have frighted sailors too. So they stumbled along drenched with the waves, and clustered round Elzevir, for they looked on him as a leader, because he knew the ways of the sea and was the only one left calm in this dreadful strait. It was plain that when the Dutch crew found they were embayed, and that the ship must drift into the breakers, they had taken to the boats, for gig and jolly boat were gone, and only the pinnace left amidships. 'Twas too heavy a boat, perhaps, for them to have got out in such a fearful sea, but there it lay, and it was to that the prisoners turned their eyes. Some had hold of Elsevier's arms, some fell upon the deck and caught him by the knees, beseeching him to show them how to get the pinnace out. Then he spoke, shouting to make them hear. "Friends, any man that takes to boat is lost. I know this bay and know this beach, and was indeed born hereabouts. So never knew a boat come to land in such a sea, save bottom uppermost. So if you want my counsel, there you have it, namely, to stick by the ship. In half an hour we shall be in the breakers, and I will put the helm up and try to head the brig bows onto the beach. So every man will have a chance to fight for his own life, and God have mercy on those that drown." I knew what he said was the truth, and there was nothing for it but to stick to the ship, for though that was small chance enough, but those poor, fear-demented souls would have nothing of his advice now 'twas given, and must needs go for the boat. Then some came up from below who had been in the spirit room, and were full of drink and drink courage, and heartened on the rest, saying that they would have the pinnace out, and every soul should be saved. Indeed, fate seemed to point them that road, for a heavier sea than any came on board, and cleared away a great piece of the larboard bulwarks that had been working loose, and made, as it were, a clear launching way for the boat. Again did Elzevir try to prevail with them to stand by the ship, but they turned away and all made for the pinnace. It lay amidships and was a heavy boat enough, but with so many hands to help they got it to the broken bulwarks. Then Elzevir, seeing they would have it out at any price, showed them how to take advantage of the sea, and shifted the helm a little, till the Aurungzebe fell off to larboard, and put the gap in the bulwarks on the lee. So, in a few minutes, there it lay at a rope's end on the sheltered side, deep laden with 30 men, who were ill found with oars, and much worse found with skill to use them. There were one or two before they left shouted to Elzevir and me to try to make us follow them, partly, I think, because they really liked Elzevir, and partly that they might have a sailor on the boat to direct them. But the others cast off and left us with a curse, saying that we might go and drown for obstinate Englishmen. So we two were left alone on the brig, which kept drifting backwards slowly. But the pinnace was soon lost to sight, though we saw that they were rowing wild as soon as she passed out of the shelter of the ship, and that they had much ado to keep her head to the sea. Then Elzevir went to the kicking wheel, and beckoned me to help him, and between us we put the helm hard up. I saw then that he had given up all hope of the wind shifting, and was trying to run her dead for the beach. She was broached to with her bows to the wind, but gradually paid off as the staysail filled, and so she headed straight for shore. The November night had fallen, and it was very dark. Only the white fringe of the breakers could be seen, and grew plainer as we drew close to it. The wind was blowing fiercer than ever, and the waves broke more fiercely nearer the shore. They had lost their dirty yellow colour when the light died, and were rolling after us like great black mountains with a combing white top that seemed as if they must overwhelm us every minute. Twice they pooped us, and we were up to our waists in icy water, but still held to the wheel for our lives. The white line was nearer to us now, and above all the rage of wind and sea, I could hear the awful roar of the undertow sucking back the pebbles on the beach. The last time I could remember hearing that roar was when I lay, as a boy, one summer's night twixt sleep and waking, in the little whitewashed bedroom at my aunt's. And I wondered now if any sat before their inland hearths this night, and hearing that far distant roar, would throw another log on the fire and thank God they were not fighting for their lives in Moonfleet Bay. I could picture all that was going on this night on the beach, how Ratsey and the landers would have sighted the Aurungzebe, perhaps at noon, perhaps before, and knew she was embayed, and nothing could save her but the wind drawing to east. But The wind would hold pinned in the south, and they would see sail after sail blown off her, and watch her wear, and every time come nearer in. And the talk would run through the street that there was a ship could not weather the Snout, and must come ashore by sundown. Then half the village would be gathered on the beach, with the men ready to risk their lives for hours, and in no wise wishing for the ship to be wrecked, yet anxious not to lose their chance of booty if Providence should rule that wrecked she must be. And I knew Ratsey would be there, and Damon, Tewkesbury and Laver, and like enough Parson Glennie, and at that perhaps my thoughts came back to where we were, for I heard Elzevir speaking to me. "Look," he said, "there's a light." 'Twas but the faintest twinkle, or not even that, only something that told there was a light behind drift and darkness. It grew clearer as we looked at it, and again was lost in the murk, and then Elzevir said, "Maskew's match!" It was a long-forgotten name that came to me from so far off, down such long alleys of the memory, that I had, as it were, to grope and grapple with it to know what it should mean. Then it all came back, and I was a boy again on the trawler, creeping shorewards in the light breeze of an August night, and watching that friendly twinkle from the manor woods above the village. Had she not promised she would keep that lamp alight to guide all sailors every night till I came back again? Was she not waiting still for me? Was I not coming back to her now? But what a coming back! No more a boy, not on an August night, but a broken, branded convict in the November gale. 'Twas well, indeed, there was between us that white fringe of death, that she might never see what I had fallen to. 'Twas likely Elzevir had something of the same thoughts, for he spoke again, forgetting perhaps that I was man now, and no longer boy, and using a name he had not used for years. "Johnny," he said, "I am cold and sore downhearted. In 10 minutes we shall be in the surf. Go down to the spirit locker, drink thyself, and bring me up a bottle here. We should both need a young man's strength, and I had not got it any more." I did as he bid me, and found the locker, though the cabin was all awash, and having drunk myself, took him the bottle back. 'Twas good Hollands enough, being from the captain's own store, but nothing to the old Ararat milk of the Why Not. Elzevir took a pull at it, and then flung the bottle away. "'Tis sound liquor," he laughed, "and good for rotten chills, as Ratsey would have said." We were very near the white fringe now, and the waves followed us higher and more curling. Then there was a sickly wan glow that spread itself through the watery air in front of us, and I knew that they were burning a blue light on the beach. They would all be there, waiting for us, though we could not see them, and they did not know that there were only 2 men that they were signalling to, and those 2 Moonfleet born. They burn that light in Moonfleet Bay, just where a little streak of clay crops out beneath the pebbles, and if a vessel can make that spot, she gets a softer bottom. So we put the wheel over a bit and set her straight for the flare. There was a deafening noise as we came near the shore, the shrieking of the wind in the rigging, the crash of the combing seas, and over all the awful grinding roar of the undertow sucking down the pebbles. "It's coming now," Elzevir said, and I could see dim figures moving in the misty glare from the blue light. And then, just as the Aurangzeba was making fair for the signal, a monstrous combing sea pooped her and washed us both from the wheel, forward in a swirling flood. We grasped at anything we could, and so brought up bruised and half drowned in the forechains. But as the wheel ran free, another sea struck her and slewed her round. There was a second while the water seemed over, under, and on every side, and then the Aurangzeba went broadside on Moonfleet Beach, with a noise like thunder and a blow that stunned us. I have seen ships come ashore in that same place before and since, and bump on and off with every wave till the stout bulks could stand the pounding no more and parted. But 'twas not so with our poor brig, for after that first fearful shock she never moved again, being flung so firm upon the beach by one great swamping wave that never another had power to uproot her. Only she careened over beachwards, turning herself away from the seas as a child bows his head to escape a cruel master's ferule, and then her masts broke off, first the fore and then the main, with a splitting crash that made itself heard above all. We were on the lee side underneath the shelter of the deck-house, clinging to the shrouds, now up to our knees in water as the wave came on, now left high and dry when it went back. The blue light was still burning, but the ship was beached a little to the right of it, and the dim group of fishermen had moved up along the beach till they were opposite us. Thus we were but 100 feet distant from them, but 'twas the interval of death and life, for between us and the shore was a maddened race of seething water, white foaming waves that leapt up from all sides against our broken bulwarks, or sucked back the pebbles with a grinding roar till they left the beach nearly dry. We stood there for a minute, hanging on and waiting for resolution to come back to us after the shock of grounding. On the weather side, the seas struck and curled over the brig with a noise like thunder and the force of countless tons. They came over the top of the deck-house in a cataract of solid water, and there was a crash, crash, crash of rending wood as plank after plank gave way before that stern assault. We could feel the deck-house itself quiver and shake again as we stood with our backs against it, and at last it moved so much that we knew it must soon be washed over on us. The moment had come. "We must go after the next big wave runs back," Elzevir shouted. "Jump when I give the word, and get as far up the pebbles as you can before the next comes in. They will throw us a rope's end to catch. So now goodbye, John, and God save us both." I wrung his hand and took off my convict clothes, keeping my boots on to meet the pebbles, and was so cold that I almost longed for the surf. Then we stood, waiting side by side till a great wave came in, turning the space twixt ship and shore into a boiling cauldron. A minute later 'twas all sucked back again with a roar, and we jumped. I fell on hands and feet where the water was a yard deep under the ship, but got my footing and floundered through the slop in a desperate struggle to climb as high as might be on the beach before the next wave came in. I saw the string of men lashed together, and reaching down as far as man might, to save any that came through the surf, and heard them shout to cheer us, and marked a coil of rope flung out. Elzevir was by my side and saw it too, and we both kept our feet and plunged forward through the quivering slack water. But then there came an awful thunder behind, the crash of the sea over the wreck, and we knew that another mountain wave was on our heels. It came in with a swishing roar, a rush and rise of furious water that swept us like corks up the beach, till we were within touch of the rope's end, and the men shouted again to hearten us as they flung it out. Elzevir seized it with his left hand and reached his right out to me. Our fingers touched, and in that very moment the wave fell instantly with an awful suck, and I was swept down the beach again. Yet the undertow took me not back to sea, for amid the floating wreckage floated the shattered maintop, and in the truck of that great spar I caught, and so was left with it upon the beach 30 paces from the men and Elzevir. Then he left his own assured salvation, namely the rope, and strode down again into the very jaws of death to catch me by the hand and set me on my feet. Sight and breath were failing me. I was numb with cold and half dead from the buffeting of the sea, yet his giant strength was powerful to save me then, as it had saved me before. So when we heard once more the warning crash and thunder from the returning wave, we were but a fathom distant from the rope. "Take heart, lad," he cried. "'Tis now or never." And as the water reached our breasts, gave me a fierce shove forward with his hands. There was a roar of water in my ears, with a great shouting of the men upon the beach, and then I caught the rope. And that's the end of the chapter, and where we shall take a break. Thank you.
that everyone has had a good and worthwhile, I'm going to use the word properly. I hope you've had a good break. There we go. That's just... Wow. I'm going to try and use fewer words sometimes. Oh, hi indeed, Ray Tracer. What's up? Yeah. I guess what I can do. We don't have a lot of book left. We've got... What is this? Yeah, we've got like 15 and a half pages to go. Oh, and a half. Hey, welcome. I hope the thing you were doing this evening has been good and productive. We are on the last chapter of Moonfleet. Getting in before the break. Nice. Cool. Went well, thanks. Good. Oh, I'm glad to hear it. Yeah. I'm going to carry on because if we finish the book, we can chat at the end, which would be nice. So yeah, on with the story. The last chapter. Chapter 19. On the beach. Toll for the brave that are no more, all sunk beneath the wave, fast by their native shore. Cowper. The night was cold, and I had nothing on me save breeches and boots, and those drenched with the sea, and had been wrestling with the surf so long that there was little life left in me. Yet once I clutched the rope, I clung to it for very life, and in a minute found myself in the midst of the beachmen. I heard them shout again, and felt strong hands seize me, but could not see their faces for a mist that swam before my eyes, and could not speak because my throat and tongue were cracked with the salt water, and the voice would not come. There was a crowd about me of men and some women, and I spread out my hands blindly to catch hold of them, but my knees failed and let me down upon the beach. And after that, I remember only having coats flung over me, and being carried off out of the wind, and laid in warmest blankets before a fire. I was numb with the cold, my hair was matted with the salt, and my flesh white and shriveled, but they forced liquor into my mouth, and so I lay in drowsy content till utter weariness bound me in sleep. It was a deep and dreamless sleep for hours, and when it left me gently, and as it were inch by inch, I found I was still lying wrapped in blankets by the fire. Oh, what a vast and infinite peace that was to lie there half asleep, yet wake enough to know that I had slipped my prison and the pains of death, and was a free man here in my native place. At last I shifted myself a little, growing more awake, and opening my eyes saw that I was not alone, for two men sat at a table by me with glasses and a bottle before them. "He's coming too," said one, "and may yet live to tell us who he is, and from what port his craft sailed." "There has been many a craft," the other said, "has sailed for many a port, and made this beach her last, and many an honest man has landed on it, and never one alive in such a sea. Nor would this one be living either, if it had not been for that other brave heart to stand by and save him." Brave heart, he said to himself. "Here, pass me the bottle or I shall get the vapours. 'Tis good against these early chills, and I have not been in this place for 10 years past, since poor Elzevir was cut adrift." I could not see the speaker's face from where I lay upon the floor, yet seemed to know his voice, and so was fumbling in my weakened mind to put a name to it, when he spoke of Elzevir and sent my thoughts flying elsewhere. "Elzevir," I said, "where is Elzevir?" and sat up to look round, expecting to see him lying near me, and remembering the wreck more clearly now, and how he had saved me with that last shove forward on the beach. But he was not to be seen, and so I guessed that his great strength had brought him round quicker than had my youth, and that he had gone back to the beach. "Hush," said one of the men at the table. "Lie down and get to sleep again." And then he added, speaking to his comrade, "His brain is wandering yet. Do you see how he has caught up my words about Elzevir?" "No," I struck in. "My head is clear enough. I am speaking of Elzevir Block. I pray you tell me where he is. Is he all well again?" And they got up and stared at one another and at me when I named Elzevir Block. And then I knew the one that spoke for Master Ratsey, only greyer than he was. "Who are you?" he cries. "Who talk of Elzevir Block?" "Do you not know me, Master Ratsey?" And I looked him full in his face. "I am John Trenchard, who left you so long ago. I pray you, tell me, where is Master Block?" Master Ratsey looked as if he had seen a ghost, and was struck dumb at first, but then ran up and shook me by the hand so warmly that I fell back again on my pillow, and while he poured out questions in a flood, how had I fared, where had I been, whence had I come, until I stopped him, saying, "Softly, kind friend, and I will answer. Only tell me first, where is Master Elzevir?" "Nay, that I cannot say," he answered, "for never a soul has set eyes on Elzevir since that summer morning we put thee and him ashore at Newport." "Oh, fool me not," I cried out, chafing at his excuses. "I am not wandering now. 'Twas Elzevir that saved me in the surf last night. 'Twas he that landed with me." There was a look of sad amaze that came on Ratsey's face when I said that, a look that woke in me an awful surmise. "What?" cried he. "Was that Master Elzevir that dragged thee through the surf?" "Aye, 'twas he landed with me, 'twas he landed with me," I said, trying, as it were, to make true by repeating that which I feared was not the truth. There was a minute's silence, and then Ratsey spoke very softly. "There was none landed with you. There was no soul saved from that ship alive, save you." His words fell, one by one, upon my ear, as if they were drops of molten lead. "It is not true," I cried. "He pulled me up the beach himself, and it was he that pushed me forward to the rope." "Aye, he saved thee, and then the undertow got hold of him and swept him down under the curl. I could not see his face, but might have known there never was a man save Elzevir who could fight the surf on Moonfleet Beach like that. Yet, had we known 'twas he, we could have done no more, for many risked their lives last night to save you both. We could have done no more." Then I gave a great groan for utter anguish, to think that he had given up the safety he had won for himself, and laid down his life there on the beach for me, to think that he had died on the threshold of his home, that I should never get a kind look from him again, nor ever hear his kindly voice. It is wearisome to others to talk of deep grief, and beside that, no words, even of the wisest man, can ever set it forth, not even if we were able, could our memory bear to tell it. So I shall not speak more of that terrible blow, only to say that sorrow, so far from casting my body down, as one might have expected, gave it strength, and I rose up from the mattress where I had been lying. They tried to stop me and even to hold me back, but for all I was so weak, I pushed them aside, and must needs fling a blanket round me and away back to the beach. The morning was breaking as I left the Why Not, for 'twas in no other place that I lay, and the wind, though still high, had abated. There were light clouds crossing the heavens very swiftly, and between them patches of clear sky where the stars were growing paler before the dawn. The stars were growing paler, but there was another star that shone out from the manor woods above the village, although I could not see the house, and told me Grace, like the wise virgins, kept her lamp alight all night. Yet even that light shone without lustre for me then, for my heart was too full to think of anything but of him who had laid down his life for mine, and of the strong, kind heart that was stilled forever. 'Twas well I knew the way, so sure of old, from Why Not to beach, for I took no heed to path or feet, but plunged along in the morning dusk, blind with sorrow and weariness of spirit. There was a fire of driftwood burning at the back of the beach, and round it crouched a group of men in reefing jackets and sou'westers, waiting for morning to save what they might from the wreck. But I gave them a wide berth, and so passed in the darkness without a word, and came to the top of the beach. There was light enough to make out what was doing. The sea was running very high, but with the falling wind and waves came in more leisurely and But with the falling wind, the waves came in more leisurely, and with less of broken water, curling over in a tawny sweep and regular thunderous beat all along the bay for miles. There was no sign left of the hull of the Aurangzeb, but the beach was strewn with so much wreckage as one would have thought could never come from so small a ship. There were barrels and kegs, gratings and hatch covers, booms and pieces of mast and trucks, and beside all that, the heaving water inshore was covered with a floating mask of broken matchwood, and the waves, as they curled over, carried up and dashed down on the pebbles planks and beams beyond number. There were a dozen or more of men on the seaward side of the beach, with oilskins to keep the wet out, prowling up and down the pebbles to see what they could lay their hands on. Now and then they would run down almost into the white fringe, risking their own lives to save a keg as they had risked them to save their fellows last night, as they had risked their lives to save ours, as Elzevir had risked his life to save mine, and lost it there in the white fringe. I sat down at the top of the beach, with elbows on knees, head between hands, and face set out to sea, not knowing well why I was there or what I sought, but only thinking that Elzevir was floating somewhere in that floating skin of wreckwood, and that I must be at hand to meet him when he came ashore. He would surely come in time, for I had seen others come ashore that way. For when the Batavia man went on the beach, I stood as near her as our rescuers had stood to us last night, and there was some aboard who took the fatal leap from off her bows and tried to battle through the surf. I was so near them I could mark their features and read the wild hope in their faces at the first, and then the undertow took hold of them, and never one that saved his life that day. And yet all came to beach at last, and I knew them by their dead faces for the men I had seen, hoping against hope twixt ship and shore. Some naked and some clothed, some bruised and sorely beaten by the pebbles in the sea, and some sound and untouched. All came to beach at last. So I sat and waited for him to come, and none of the beach walkers said anything to me. The Moonfleet men thinking I came from Ringstave, and the Langton men that I belonged to Moonfleet, and both that I had marked some cask at sea for my own, and was waiting till it should come in. Only after a while Master Ratsey joined me, and sitting down by me, begged me to eat bread and meat that he had brought. Now I had little heart to eat, but took what he gave me to save myself from his importunities, and having once tasted, was led by nature to eat all, and was much benefited thereby. Yet I could not talk with Ratsey, nor answer any of his questions, though another time I should have put 1,000 to him myself, and he, seeing 'twas no good, sat by me in silence, using a spyglass now and again to make out the things floating at sea. As the day grew, the men left the fire at the back of the beach, and came down to the seafront, where the waves were continually casting up fresh spoil. And there all worked with a will, not each one for his own hand, but all to make a common hoard which should be divided afterwards. Among the flotsam, moving outside the breakers, I could see more than one dark ball, like black boys, bobbing up and down, and lifting as the wave came by, and knew them for the heads of drowned men. Yet, though I took Ratsey's glass and scanned all carefully enough, I could make nothing of them, but saw the pinnace floating bottom up, and farther out another boat deserted and down to her gunwale in the water. 'Twas midday before the first body was cast up, when the sky was breaking a little, and a thin and watery sun trying to get through, and afterwards 3 other bodies followed. They were part of the pinnace's crew, for all had the iron ring on the left wrist, as Ratsey told me, who went down to see them, though he said nothing of the branded Y, and they were taken up and put under some sheltering at the back of the beach, there to lie till a grave should be made ready for them. Then I felt something that told me he was coming, and saw a body rolled over in the surf, and knew it for the one I sought. 'Twas nearest me he was flung up, and I ran down the beach, caring nothing for the white foam, nor for the undertow, and laid hold of him. For had he not left the rescue line last night and run down into the surf to save my worthless life? Ratsey was at my side, and so between us we drew him up out of the running foam, and then I wrung the water from his hair and wiped his face, and, kneeling down there, kissed him. When they saw that we had got a body, others of the men came up and stared to see me handle him so tenderly. But when they knew at last I was a stranger, and had the iron ring upon my wrist and a Y burned upon my cheek, they stared the more, until the tale went round that I was he who had come through the surf last night alive, and this poor body was my friend, who had lain down his life for me. Then I saw Ratsey speak with one and another of the group, and knew that he was telling them our names, and some that I had known came up and shook me by the hand, not saying anything, because they saw my heart was full. And some bent down and looked at Elsevier's face, and touched his hands as if to greet him. Sea and stones had been merciful with him, and he showed neither bruise nor wound, but his face wore a look of great peace, and his eyes and mouth were shut. Even I, who knew where 'twas, could scarcely see the Y mark on his cheek, for the paleness of death had taken out the colour of the scar, and left his face as smooth and mellow white as the alabaster figures in Moonfleet church. His body was naked from the waist up, and he had stripped for jumping from the brig, and we could see, and we could see the great broad chest and swelling muscles that had pulled him out of many a desperate pass, and only failed him for the first and last time so few hours ago. They stood for a little while looking in silence at the old lander who had run his last cargo on Moonfleet beach, and then they laid his arms down by his side, and slung him in a sail, and carried him away. I walked beside. Then as we came down across the sea meadows, the sun broke out, and we met little groups of school children making their way down to the beach to see what was doing with the wreck. They stood aside to let us go by, the boys pulling their caps and the girls dropping a curtsy. When they knew that it was a poor drowned body passing, and as I saw the children, I thought I saw myself among them, and I was no more a man, but just come out from Mr. Glennie's teaching in the old almshouse hall. Thus we came to the Why Not, and there set him down. The inn had not been let, as I learned afterwards, since Maskew died, and they had put a fire in it last night for the first time, knowing that the brig would be wrecked, and thinking that some might come off with their lives and require tending. The door stood open, and they carried him into the parlour, where the fire was still burning, and laid him down on the trestle table, covering his face and body with the sail. This done, they all stood round a little while, awkwardly enough, as not knowing what to do, and then slipped away one by one, because grief is a thing that only women know how to handle, and they wanted to be back on the beach to get what might be from the wreck. Last of all went Master Ratsey, saying he saw that I would as lief be alone, and that he would come back before dark. So I was left alone with my dead friend, and with a host of bitterest thoughts. The room had not been cleaned. There were spider webs on the beams, and the dust stood so thick on the window panes as to shut out half the light. The dust was on everything, on chairs and tables, save on the trestle table where he lay. 'Twas on this very trestle they had laid out David's body. 'Twas in this very room that this still form, who would never more know either joy or sorrow, had bowed down and wept over his son. The room was just as we had left it an April evening years ago, and on the dresser lay the great backgammon board, so dusty that one could not read the lettering on it. Life is like a game of hazard. A skilful player will make something of the worst of throws. But what unskilful players we had been! How bad our throws! How little we had made of them! 'Twas with thoughts like this that I was busy while the short afternoon was spent, and the story went up and down the village, how that Elzevir Block and John Trenchard, who left so long ago, were come back to Moonfleet, and that the old lander was drowned saving the young man's life. The dusk was creeping up as I turned back the sail from off his face and took another look at my lost friend, my only friend. For who was there now to care a jot for me? I might go and drown myself on Moonfleet Beach for anyone that would grieve over me. What did it profit me to have broken bonds and to be free again? What use was freedom to me now? Where was I to go? What was I to do? My friend was gone. So I went back and sat with my head in my hands looking into the fire, when I heard someone step into the room, but did not turn, thinking it was Master Ratsey come back, and treading lightly so as not to disturb me. Then I felt a light touch on my shoulder, and looking up saw standing by me a tall and stately woman, girl no longer, but woman in the full strength and beauty of youth. I knew her in a moment, for she had altered little, except her oval face had something more of dignity, and the tawny hair that used to fly about her back was now gathered up. She was looking down at me, and let her hand rest on my shoulder. "John," she said, "have you forgotten me? May I not share your sorrow? Did you not think to tell me you were come? Did you not see the light? Did you not know that there was a friend that waited for you?" I said nothing, not being able to speak, but marvelling how she had come just in the point of time to prove me wrong, to think I had no friend. And she went on. "Is it well for you to be here? Grieve not too sadly, for none could have died nobler than he died. And in these years that you have been away, I have thought much of him and found him good at heart. And if he did aught wrong, 'twas because others wronged him more." And while she spoke, I thought how Elzevir had gone to shoot her father, and only failed of it by a hair's breadth, and yet she spoke so well I thought he never really meant to shoot at all, but only to scare the magistrate. And what a whirligig of time was here, that I should have saved Elzevir from having that blot on his conscience, and then that he should save my life, and now that Maskew's daughter should be the one to praise Elzevir when he lay dead. And still I could not speak. And again she said, "John, have you no word for me? Have you forgotten? Do you not love me still? Have I no part in your sorrow?" Then I took her hand in mine and raised it to my lips, and said, "Dear Mistress Grace, I have forgotten nothing, and honour you above all others. But of love I may not speak more to you, nor you to me, for we are no more boy and girl, as in times past. But you a noble lady, and I a broken wretch." And with that I told her how I had been 10 years a prisoner, and why, and showed her the iron ring upon my wrist, and the brand upon my cheek. At the brand she stared, and said, "Speak not of wealth. 'Tis not wealth makes men, and if you had come back no richer than you went, you are come back no poorer, nor poorer, John, in honour. And I am rich, and have more wealth than I can rightly use, so speak not of these things, but be glad that you are poor, and were not left to profit by that evil treasure. But for this brand, it is no prison name to me, but the Mohune's badge to show that you are theirs and must do their bidding. Said I not to you, have a care how you touch the treasure, it was evilly come by and will bring a curse with it. But now, I pray you with a greater earnestness, seeing you bear this mark upon you, touch no penny of that treasure, if it should some day come back to you, but put it to such uses as Colonel Mohune thought would help his sinful soul." With that she took her hand from mine and bade me good night, leaving me in the darkening room with the glow from the fire lighting up the sail and the outline of that body that lay under it. After she was gone, I pondered long over what she had said, and what that should mean when she spoke of the treasure one day coming back to me, but wondered how much the most to find how constant is the love of woman, and how she could still find a place in her heart for so poor a thing as I. But as to what she said, I was to learn some meaning this very night. Master Ratsey had come in and gone again, not stopping with me very long, because there was much doing on the beach, but bidding me be of good cheer, and have no fear of the law, for that the ban against me and the head price had been dead for many a year. 'Twas Grace had made her lawyers move for this, refusing herself to sign the hue and cry, and saying that the fatal shot was fired by misadventure. And so a dread which was just waking was laid to rest for ever, and when Ratsey went I made up the fire, and lay down in the blankets in front of it, for I was dog-tired and longed for sleep. I was already dozing, but not asleep, when there was a knock at the door, and in walked Mr. Glennie. He was aged, and stooped a little, as I could see by the firelight, but for all that I knew him at once, and sitting up offered him what welcome I could. He looked at me curiously at first, as taking note of the bearded man that had grown out of the boy he remembered, but gave me very kindly greeting, and sat down beside me on a bench. First, he lifted the sail from the dead body, and looked at the sleeping face. Then he took out a common prayer, reading the commendamus over the dead, and giving me spiritual comfort, and lastly, he fell to talking about the past. From him I learnt something of what had happened while I was away, though, for that matter, nothing had happened at all, except a few deaths, for that is the only sort of change for which we look in Moonfleet. And among those who had passed away was Miss Arnold, my aunt, so that I was another friend the less, if indeed I should count her a friend. For, though she meant well, she showed her care with too much strictness to let me love her, and so, in my great sorrow for Elzevir, I found no room to grieve for her. Whether from the spiritual solace Mr. Glennie offered me, or whether from his pointing out how much cause for thankfulness I had in being loosed out of prison and saved from imminent death, certain it was I felt some assuagement of grief, and took pleasure in his talk. And though I may by some be reprehended, he said, for presuming to refer to profane authors after citing Holy Scripture, yet I cannot refrain from saying that even the great poet Homer counsels moderation in mourning. For quickly, says he, cometh satiety of chilly grief. After this I thought he was going, but he cleared his throat in such a way that I guessed he had something important to say, and he drew a long folded blue paper from his pocket. "My son," he said, opening it leisurely and smoothing it out upon his knee, "we should never revile fortune, and in speaking of fortune I only use that appellation in our poor human sense, and do not imply that there is any chance at all but what is subject to an overruling providence. We should never, I say, revile fortune, for just at the moment when she appears to have deserted us, she may be only gone away to seek some richest treasure to bring back with her. And that this is so, let what I am about to read to you prove. So light a candle and set it by me, for my eyes cannot follow the writing in this dancing firelight." I took an end of candle which stood on the mantelpiece, and did as he bade me, and he went on. "I shall read you this letter which I received near 8 years ago, and of the weightiness of it you shall yourself judge. I shall not here set down that letter in full, although I have it by me, and will put it shortly, because it was from a lawyer tricked with long-winded phrases that spun out as such letters are to afford cover afterwards for a heavier charge. It was addressed to the Reverend Horace Glennie, perpetual curate of Moonfleet, in the county of Dorset, England, and written in English by Heer Houston, attorney of the Signariat of the Hague, in the Kingdom of Holland. It set forth that one Crispin Aldebrand, jeweller and dealer in precious stones at the Hague, had sent for Heer Houston to draw a will for him, and that the said Crispin Aldebrand, being near his end, had deposed to the said Heer Houston that he, Aldebrand, was desirous to leave all his goods to one John Trenchard of Moonfleet, Dorset, in the Kingdom of England, and that he was moved to do this, first, by the consideration that he, Aldebrand, had no children to whom to leave aught, and second, because he desired to make full and fitting restitution to John Trenchard, for that he had once obtained from the said John a diamond without paying the proper price for it, which stone he, Aldobrand, had sold and converted into money, and having so done, found afterwards both his fortune and his health decline, so that, although he had great riches before he became possessed of the diamond, these had forthwith melted through unfortunate ventures and speculations, till he had little remaining to him but the money that this same diamond had brought. He therefore left to John Trenchard everything of which he should die possessed, and being near death begged his forgiveness if he had wronged him in aught. These were the instructions from which Heer Houston received from Mr. Aldobrand, whose health sensibly declined until 3 months later he died. It was well, Heer Houston added, that the will had been drawn in good time, for as Mr. Aldobrand grew weaker, he became a prey to delusions, saying that John Trenchard had laid a curse upon the diamond, and professing even to relate the words of it, namely, that it should bring evil in this life and damnation in that which is to come. Nor was this all, for he could get no sleep, but woke up with a horrid dream, in which, so he informed Heer Houston, he saw continually a tall man with a coppery face and black beard draw the bed-curtains and mock him. Thus he came at length to his end, and after his death, Heer Houston endeavoured to give effect to the provision of the will, by writing to John Trenchard at Moonfleet, Dorset, to apprise him that he was left sole heir. That address, indeed, was all the indication that Aldobrand had given, though he constantly promised his attorney to let him have closer information as to Trenchard's whereabouts in good time. This information was, however, always postponed, perhaps because Aldobrand hoped he might get better and so repent of his repentance. So all Heer Houston had to do was to write to Trenchard at Moonfleet, and in due course the letter was returned to him, with the information that Trenchard had fled that place to escape the law, and was then nowhere to be found. After that, Heer Houston was advised to write to the minister of the parish, and so addressed these lines to Mr. Glennie. This was the gist of the letter which Mr. Glennie read, and you may easily guess how such news moved me, and how we sat far into the night talking, and considered what steps it was best to take, for we feared lest so long an interval as 8 years having elapsed, the lawyers might have made some other disposition of the money. It was midnight when Mr. Glennie left. The candle had long burnt out, but the fire was bright, and he knelt a moment by the trestle-table before he went out. "You made a good end, John," he said, rising from his knees, "and I pray that our end may be in as good cause when it comes. For with the best of us the hour of death is an awful hour, and we may well pray as every Sunday to be delivered in it. But there is another time which those who wrote this litany thought no less perilous, and bade us pray to be delivered in all time of our wealth. So I pray that if, after all, this wealth comes to your hand, you may be led to use it well. For though I do not hold with foolish tales, or think a curse hangs on riches themselves, yet if riches have been set apart for a good purpose, even by evil men, as Colonel John Mohune set apart this treasure, it cannot be but that we shall do grievous wrong in putting them to other use. So fare you well, and remember that there are other treasures beside this, and that a good woman's love is worth far more than all the gold and jewels in the world, as I once knew." And with that he left me. I guessed that he had spoken with grace that day, and as I lay dozing in front of the fire, alone in this old room I knew so well, alone with that silent friend who had died to save me, I mourned him none the less, but yet sorrowed not as one without hope. What needs to tell this tale at any more length, since you may know, by my telling it, that all went well? For what man would sit down to write a history that ended in his own discomfiture? All that great wealth came to my hands, and if I do not say how great it was, 'tis that I may not wake envy, for it was far more than ever I could have thought. And of that money I never touched penny piece, having learnt a bitter lesson in the past, but laid it out in good works, with Mr. Glennie and Grace to help me. First, we rebuilt and enlarged the almshouses beyond all that Colonel John Mohune could ever think of, and so established them as to be a haven forever for all worn-out sailors of that coast. Next, we sought the guidance of the Brethren of the Trinity, and built a lighthouse on the Snout, to be a channel beacon for sea-going ships, as Maskew's Match had been a light for our fishing boats in the past. Lastly, we beautified the church, turning out the cumbrous seats of oak, and neatly pewing it with deal and baize, that made it the most commodious to sit in of the Sabbath. There was also much old glass which we removed, and reglazed all the windows tight against the wind, so that what with a high pulpit, reading desk, and seat for master clerk, the new commandment boards each side of the holy table, there was not a church could vie with ours in the countryside. But that great vault below it, with its memories, was set in order, and then safely walled up, and after that nothing more was ever heard of Blackbeard and his lost Mohunes. And as for the landers, I cannot say where they went. And if a cargo is still run of a dark night upon the beach, I know nothing of it, being both lord of the manor and justice of the peace. The village, too, renewed itself with the new almshouses and church. There were old houses rebuilt and fresh ones reared, and all are ours except the Why Not, which still remains the Duchy Inn. And that was let again, and men left the chuffs at Ringstave and came back to their old haunt, and any shipwrecked or travel-worn sailor found board and welcome within its doors. And of the Mohune Hospital, for that was what the almshouses were now called, Master Glennie was first warden with fair rooms, and a full library, and Master Ratsey head of the beadsmen. There they spent happier days, till they were gathered in the fullness of their years, and sleep on the sunny side of the church, within sound of the sea, by that great buttress where I once found Master Ratsey listening with his ear to the ground, and close beside them lies Elzevir Block, most faithful and most loved by me, with a text on his tombstone, "Greater love hath no man than this, that a man lay down his life for his friend," and some of Master Glennie's verses. And of ourselves let me speak last. The manor house is a stately home again, with trim lawns and terraced balustrades, where we can sit and see the thin blue smoke hang above the village on summer evenings. And in the manor woods my wife and I have seen a little Grace and a little John and little Elzevir, our firstborn, play. And now our daughter is grown up, fair to us as the polished corners of the temple, and our sons are gone to serve King George on sea and land. But as for us, for Grace and me, we never leave this, our happy Moonfleet, being well content to see the dawn tipping the long cliff line with gold, and the night walking in dew across the meadows, to watch the spring clothe the beech boughs with green, or the figs ripen on the southern wall, while behind all is spread as a curtain the eternal sea, ever the same and ever changing. Yet I love to see it best when it is lashed to madness in the autumn gale, and to hear the grinding roar and churn of the pebbles, like a great organ playing all the night. 'Tis then I turn in bed and thank God, more from the heart perhaps than any other living man, that I am not fighting for my life on Moonfleet beach. And more than once I have stood, rope in hand, in that same awful place, and tried to save a struggling wretch, but never saw one come through the surf alive in such a night as he saved me. The end. Thank you for listening.